of people are going to get a really good understanding of what basically happened with India, the whole Indus Valley, and Buddhism and everything like that, which they're trying to take basically control over. Not India, the Aryans, white people. We won't get into all that. But you got to understand, so much happened during ancient times. We so stuck on Kemet, rightfully so. We stuck on, transatlantic slave trade, sub-Saharan slave trade. It's so much more that happens. It's a big gap that is basically being, looked over. It's not being talked about enough. A lot of people are not really digging into the history of it to get people to a better understanding of what took place. Because we look back, and everybody know about this, we see the black gods of Asia. You see the black gods of India. And we know that, Krishna, and we know that Vishnu and all these black gods, about the Sambo and everybody like that. All these Hindu and Buddhist gods were black. They were worshipped as black gods. All the gods were worshipped as being black at some point in time. We need to understand what happened, what took place to where the culture basically got rid of all their black idols. And understand this too, if you travel a lot, you see that, especially since I go to Thailand a lot, and in India as well, you see that the civilizations moved away from the ancient lands. That's another thing you got to understand. Why? You go back to different parts of Thailand and India as well, Cambodia, they have the ancient ruins. And the space is basically really preserved for tourists and stuff like that. But you got to think, why wouldn't they want to live there? I mean, this stuff is beautiful, as you will see. Even if he was living primitively, if he was living off the land, why wouldn't you want to be near such beautiful history? And you got to understand why they disconnect with this history, why they disconnect with the indigenous people and what basically took place. It's so much, it's so crazy, it's so deep, and we're going to get into it. Let's begin. Now, here's the thing. You have scientists that have been in agreement, for hundreds of years about out of Africa. The majority believe in the theory. And we're going to prove the theory here today. It's going to get proven 100%. And they know the truth. It's easy to prove when you pay attention to real recorded history. But we're going to prove it. But now, remember, out of Africa theory, we know the Africans came up. They crossed the Red Sea, crossed into Saudi Arabia, crossed the Persian Gulf, into Iran, and traveled up to Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Tibet, what have you, and eventually migrated over to Asia, Australia, what have you. This is the out of Africa theory. We understand this. So it is widely agreed upon that this is what took place. Now, another thing that's agreed upon is we understand these were African people. These were black people. So when you look at that migration and the fact that they traveled across, they set up civilizations and they kept moving, you understand that these were African people. So the question you have to ask yourself is, one, on an evolutionary scale, what happened to them? How did, these tribes become Indian with the straight hair? Asian, looking totally different with the Mongoloid features. What happened? And then, of course, we understand this evolution. We understand we make all races. So that's one thing that you prove in understanding that. That's one of the things that you go back to and look and see, well, okay, we see what happened. This has been proven by science, as I got into. So then you understand, one, remember, people like Dr. Ben, Azra Kwesi talked about how Egypt began, basically deep in Africa. They traveled up Kenya, Ethiopia, what have you. They traveled up the Nile into ancient Kemet. And you have to really understand, during that time, when they traveled up to ancient Kemet, they stopped. You had people that stopped. Some people was too old to continue on. Some people set up civilizations and stayed or what have you. And this took place, all the way up to Kemet. And this is documented. We can see, the writings they left. We can see artifacts that they left. Now, the thing is, I put up the video on human history, the origins of all the races. Now, when I did that video, I wanted to check and see exactly what the internet was basically saying about this, about traveling up, the whole out of Africa thing, the Andaman tribe and everything like that. Now, we understand that the Andaman, who basically is from, Indus Valley civilization, which is part of Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, we know that they are the descendants of the Africans that basically traveled over during this whole migration. The Andaman would be the descendants, and we see how they look, clearly black. Understand, we don't just have what we call, nappy hair or Negro hair, whatever they want to say. We had all kinds of hair. We had straight hair. We had curly hair. We had wavy hair. We have curly and wavy hair. We have a lot of different hair types, as you see clearly when you go in Africa. A lot of different hair types, a lot of different complexions that we can come in. So, again, when I checked, wanted to make sure everything was matching up, from the books that I read, Ivan von Sertima, Anta Diop, everybody was saying the same thing. So when I looked, it said exactly the same thing. Yeah, these people basically come from, the descendants. They are the descendants of the Africans that migrated over to the Indus Valley. But now this has changed. They changed the answer to that, and you can go into Wikipedia and you can actually edit it if you have an account or what have you. So this is what it's saying now. It says, it was previously assumed that the Andaman ancestors were part of the initial Great Coastal Migration that was the first expansion of humanity out of Africa via the Arabian Peninsula, along the coastal regions of the Indian mainland and towards Southeast Asia, Japan, and Oceania. The Andamese were considered to be a pristine example of a hypothesized Negrito population which showed similar physical characteristics and was supposed to have existed throughout Southeast Asia. The existence of a specific Negrito population is nowadays doubted. Their commonalities could be a result of evolutionary convergence and or shared history. Now, what they're basically trying to say is they're not 100% sure that the Andaman are from Africa, which, come on, they try to put it in such a way to where they cast doubt on who these people really are. But again, who else would they be? Where else would they come from? You got to understand how subtle this stuff is. It's crazy. It's loopy. One, you got the whole out of Africa theory. What other race of people could they be? In India, in Asia, what could they be? Well, we know that Africans migrated over there. What could they be from? Now, they talk about commonalities and everything like that, meaning they look African. They think that they basically, came together based on convergence, meaning that you had a different group of people come together with another group of people to create the Andaman. It doesn't matter. You have Africans come together to make Africans, if that's the case they want to go against. No matter how you slice it, we're talking about African people. Now, let's be real here. You can take a car and you can drive from Cairo all the way over to Mumbai. Plain and simple. It's one big landmass. So you can't even be, skeptical about the Africans coming up out of Africa and traveling over, towards India when it's one mass. It's connected. We don't know how much more connected it was back then. But you got to understand, it's going to be a lot of this kind of stuff we're going to see coming up, what they're trying to do. And to see that this is something new, that they changed this recently, is something that's real, it's alarming. It's like, okay, why would they change this? And you got to understand, too, which we're going to get into about the Indian culture, everything that's going on in India, about why that thing is set up like that, why they deny their own people. We're going to get into their whole system because it's a crazy system that's ancient that's taking place in India. Some of you might know what I'm talking about. We're going to get into it. But remember, as I said, you had Ezra Quashie, Dr. Ben, a lot of other researchers that know their stuff talk about, hey, we came up from inner Africa. Plain and simple. So when they talk about, the cradle of civilization began probably somewhere around Ethiopia, Kenya, what have you, it all fits, especially when you find ancient proof, ancient stuff that we see in Kemet, older in Ethiopia. So it's just proving the point all the way up to now. We can see where these people come from. So my suggestion is when they got up to Kemet, from my research, the pyramids was already there. They was there already. So again, you see how they tell us our history begins with this out of Africa. It's so much more before that. Again, that's what I always keep saying. It's like history begins with Kemet, and we don't know what the hell took place before that. Something happened, as I talked about in the Saturn and Satan series, and then all of a sudden, it's like we woke up, and then, okay, they had this notion, travel. For some reason, they knew to go north. For some reason, they knew to travel up north to get to Kemet for whatever reason. It was in their head. You had one primary group of people who had the goal to get up to Kemet because they knew something. And then you got to understand, remember, we see the information, we see the stuff they left traveling up the Nile. Everything that we see in Kemet, we see they was leaving proof of this stuff, that they already had this knowledge. So we're talking about they started the journey knowing this stuff already. How did they know? And they got to Kemet, and to me, from my research, those pyramids was there. The Great Pyramids was already there, and they were trying to reconstruct them. Now, to me, again, yeah, we descend from whatever civilization that was, whatever people that was, that built them. Well, whether you want to call them extraterrestrial or not. I talked about the giants from Saturn, everything like that. We come from them. Whoever it was, we come from them. And this is exactly what the Egyptians, they would have never did so much research if they didn't think they could tap into their power, which they did. Not 100%, but they started to get it, before they was overthrown. But they never would have went up there. They never would have knew what they know. Because these are things you got to really take into consideration. Where did they get the information from? There's no computers. How did they know? Why was everybody coming to them for information? So you got to understand what they're trying to do, how they're trying to switch it. Now, this gets really deep. It's a whole bunch of history we're going to get into. So now here's the thing that you're going to find out when you start doing this research, when you start looking into that time period, because I know a lot of you do your own research as you're supposed to. But what you're going to find, same as I did and other people as well, that's going to hit you hard, and a lot of people got confused by this, you're going to find that a lot of researchers are saying that Egypt was basically created or started by the Indians. You're going to see this a lot. You're going to see this in Indian culture. Some of you probably know what I'm talking about already. They believe that, the out of Africa theory happened. They went to India first and set up a civilization there. And it was that civilization that came back over to Kemet to set up Kemet. And, you have a lot of people in India believe this, that, we set up ancient Kemet and everything like that. No, it's not the case. Now, the ancient Egyptians talked about going to Punt. They talked about traveling the Great Sea, crossing the Great Sea to get to Punt. Now, according to researchers, Punt is supposed to be Somalia. Now, the thing is, Punt can't be Somalia because of the plants they describe when they're talking about this, because of the animals they describe. These animals and plants only fits the western coast of India. It doesn't fit Somalia. So again, we know the ancient Egyptians traveled all the way to America based upon, they found cocaine in Ramses II, stomach and everything like that. Plants and fruits that only can be found in the Americas. So we know if they traveled all the way to the Americas, it's really, of course, they probably traveled to India. But then you got to think back to the migration. You got to think back to, these people exploring. Of course, if you went up to Ethiopia, Somalia, and you started boating. Once they set up civilization there and they got sea vessels built and they knew how to, cross the seas, it's a lot easier to cross over, to India, on a boat, on a ship, than to, go by land, because then you got to cross, so much land. You don't know what's out there. And then, not sure if Saudi Arabia was desert back then or was it fertile, what have you. But either way, you still get to India faster. You get to India much faster on boat. You just get there quicker. So, of course, they probably was doing this. And as Herodotus attests to, that the ancient Egyptians, they could boat their ass off. They was good. So the thing is, now, the Indians did not, of course, travel from India up into to Kemet. Their journey straight from Ethiopia was to go straight to Kemet, and you had other people branch off. The Egyptians understanding, one, people went to India, and if you settled in Ethiopia, you knew at some point, family members or friends did boat or travel across to India, and, they would trade with each other. They would go back and forth and see each other or what have you. Just normal stuff took place. If your cousin moved to California, yeah, I'm going to go see my cousin. Hop on the plane and go see him. Same thing. But, they took boats, of course. But the thing is this. So you have the Greeks. You have the ancient Egyptians talking about the Indians. They had a name for the Indians. They called them the Dravidians, which we already know. They were referred to as the Dravidians. Now, the Egyptians and the Greeks both called them Dravidians, but they knew the Dravidians as Ethiopians. That's what they knew them as. They knew them as Ethiopians. So the Dravidian people, which would consist of, we're talking Dravadian is also a language that consists of, Afghanistan, they speak it, Pakistan, India, the Maldives. They speak it in Sri Lanka, all the way over to Cambodia. So we're talking about a lot of people. We're talking about these are African people. They spoke this language, but they were called Ethiopians. Remember, the Bible talks about Ethiopia. As soon as you get into Genesis, it's talking about Ethiopia. And that's the first, basic place they're naming. So remember, at one point, all of Africa was called Ethiopia, which Ethiopia comes from the Greek. It means burnt face. But everybody who basically described the Africans, if they wasn't saying Negrito, they was calling them Ethiopians. And you got to understand, the Egyptians think, what name would they call them? It wasn't calling them black people, or, they had a name for them, just because you black and I'm black, you might be from, Chicago, they might call you Chicago. You might be from New York, they might call you New York. You're not from where I'm from, so I'm not going to call you that. I could call you whatever I want to call you, but this is what they call people that wasn't from Kemet. They called them Ethiopians. It just so happened to be what the Greeks called them as well. In translation, we know it was a different name, but you translate it, this is what they was talking about. So, understand, it's the same people. The same people. So don't get confused when you're doing your research. This is one of the things that we're going to really touch on, because they want to try to make it like these are two separate people. And there's a reason for that, which we're going to get into. It's not. It's the same. You have the Ethiopians travel over to India and establish civilizations there, and then keep on moving west into Japan, China, and eventually, of course, Australia. So now, as I was saying, how the Greeks and the Egyptians called the Indians the Dravidians, and they knew them as the Ethiopians, plain and simple. So you had another group that was known in India called the Vedoids or the Vedoids. They were the Australoids or the Australians, the indigenous people of Australia. Now, again, as I talked about, the migration pattern that happened, they had relatives. People knew that they left people and civilizations in other countries. So when they left and crossed from Ethiopia over to India, years may pass, 10 years, 20 years, or what have you. Those civilizations understood that they knew people in another land. They would travel back and forth. No different from down with the Australoids, with the Australians. They would travel up. And if you look at a map, you can see it's a straight shot almost back up to India, that they could travel by boat or go by land. Now, this is how they differentiated the Indians or the Vedoids from the Dravidians. And basically, when you look at them, they almost look the same skin tone, of course, dark skin. But the Australoids had basically curly, wavy hair, and the Indians had straight hair. And again, this is the same thing that Diodorus attests to. This is what he talks about. He says that the only way you could tell a difference between the Africans, the Indians, what have you, is because of the hair. The hair may be different. That's how they told them apart. It's because some had straight hair, some had curly hair, some had wavy hair. This is how they told them apart. But again, they were melanated people, dark skin, burnt. In some cases they would call them, burnt skin. It's just what was known about the people and how they described them. So, it's crazy that, so much happened. You had all these civilizations worshiping black gods. Everybody worshiping black gods, until you basically had an invasion of the Europeans come in and change things. And there's no way in the world, understanding what we understand and knowing this history, that we should be debating what color was the Egyptians. There's no way in the world, if people understood the history that's out there, that's proven, because these people left artifacts, they left civilizations, they left graves. We can still find this stuff. The stuff is still there. There's no way in the world we should be debating what color was the Egyptians. There should be no Indian person talking down to a darker skinned person. It shouldn't be. It's where you came from. And you got to understand what took place. I got some Indian friends. I hope they watching this video so they can understand their history. Because from what we talked about, these dudes is lost. Y'all lost. And one of the reasons why I want to do this video, so you can understand. It's crazy how you got to tell people about their own history. They should know it. And a lot of people want to avoid the past because it deals with racism. It's consumed with racism. And that's part of an agenda that we got to look into and understand. This stuff is deep, as we'll get into in a second. But you got to understand what took place. A major thing took place that we're going to talk about.